Hey everyone, it's 7 o'clock. I know people are going to be coming in. A lot of people have registered for this, but I also want to get started ahead of time. We are going to record this. Am I right about that, Tierney? I'm saying we're going to record it and people will be able to see it after the fact on our YouTube channel. But really thankful for this time of our honoring our patron saint, Jarena Lee. And this is one of my favorite quotes from her in her autobiography. So I wanted to give you a chance to start with that. We're not going to keep it up. We'll put it back up later. But this is my favorite time of the year when we recount and share fun facts about Jarena Lee. And we do that in conversation with people who are connected either to her tradition or to her way of being in the world, or any number of ways that you might get to know Jarena Lee. And I never assume, well, I won't say I never, but I don't assume that people know who Jarena Lee was. So I'm going to start by introducing my conversation partner, who is the Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman. And then I'm going to do a couple of fun facts around Jarena Lee. And then Dr. Monica and I are going to have a conversation. You are welcome to set your comments and questions in the comment section. We have a digital person. I think our board chair is going to serve as to capture our digital work. So we want you to talk back at us and to ask questions when that time comes. So I am honored to have my colleague and sister friend, the Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman, here with us. She is an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and is the John and Patricia Cochran Scholar for Inclusive Excellence and Professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware, where she is also the Director of Graduate Studies. She has spent nearly 15 years in graduate theological education. She answered a call to ministry at age 19. She brings her experience in evangelical Christianity, Black church traditions, global ecumenical work, and indigenous spirituality to her discussion of religion. And that's all of what we want to talk about today. She is the author or editor of 6 books and several articles that focus on the role of faith in addressing critical social and philosophical issues. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, shares her lifelong dance with trauma and depression and how she discovers a new and liberating vision of God. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, is required reading at leading theological schools around the country. She is the host of the Diverse Devotions podcast about Black belief across boundaries. She speaks widely on mental wellness, navigating change, religious diversity, and religious responsible responses to intimate partner violence. Won't you help me welcome to this time of conversation the Reverend Dr. Monica Coleman?
Hello. Glad to be here.
We're so glad. I'm so glad you're here. For a lot of reasons, not the least of which I think, as I told you in preparatory conversation, that thinking about um, Jarena Lee and her prayer life and her spirituality, which clearly was diverse, and her, as she said, hearing voices about God. I couldn't think of anybody better to have this
Aw.
particular conversation with. So I'm going to read just a couple of fun facts about her. She was born free in Cape May, New Jersey, on February 11th, 1783. So we're not that far from her birthday. She preached her first sermon in 1819. She came to faith in 1807 when she heard the voice of God. She came to faith in 1804 rather, and she heard the voice of God, and she struggled, and she was trying to come to complete sanctification. Those of us in holiness tradition may know that language. But she also struggled with suicidal thoughts and fantasized about drowning herself. But she also heard God say, "Go preach." And when Richard Allen said to her, "Our discipline doesn't allow women to preach," she was actually relieved, she said. So she went and married a man who was a preacher who didn't want to hear nothing about her preaching. So she silenced herself for 7 years until he died after they had two children. And then she went back to Philly. They were outside of Philly, went back to Philly and heard God say again. She said, audibly heard God say, "Go preach." And she was sitting in Mother Bethel, and the preacher of the hour failed, flunked in the pulpit, and she stood up and started preaching. She was not formally educated, but she taught herself to read and to write. Um, and when she preached, Richard Allen got up and affirmed that she had spoken the word of God. That story is so powerful to me. I mean, there's more to say, I know, but I wanted to start with how she got started. So, where do you want to enter this conversation?
I feel so many touch points with Jarena Lee's story. I remember before, I mean, I was probably 18, I must have been, in college reading William Andrews' Orange book, Sisters in the Spirit, which includes Jarena Lee's autobiography. And just, I loved narratives from the 19th century. And I love that she was like, you can't tell me I'm called, right? Like, you can say no, but that's not what God told me. And I'm like, so about that. And that's probably what made it hard for me to get ordained. Because I felt like you can't tell me, God told me. And I kind of led with that a little bit um, in my ordination process. But I think I didn't know there were women preachers until I went to college. And so reading about her, being in college where I went to a church, an AME church where there were women clergy, I think made it so I knew it was possible, I guess. So
Yeah,
that when I did receive a call, I wasn't thrilled about it, but I knew like there are women who do this. I thought it was just kind of an old man thing. And when you're young, old is not that old, but it's old to you.
right,
Um, but it wasn't
right.
until I met, yeah, younger people and women, I was like, oh, this is a thing. And you're regular people.
Right. You accepted your call or heard the voice of God at 18 or 19?
19, 19,
I
yeah.
was 18. Well, I actually heard the voice of God much earlier than that, but I ignored it. But at 18, it was clear I wasn't going to be able to run from my call. What about you? How did you know?
Well, when I was growing up in my home church, which I loved, I had a great experience, still friends with many of the people in our youth program. If you were a guy who liked church, they say maybe you'll be a preacher one day. And if you were a girl who liked church, maybe you'll teach Sunday school one day. And that wasn't an insult because we had great Sunday school teachers, great Sunday school superintendents, most of whom were educators by day as well. Um, so no one ever said I liked church. I was always at church, but no one said, "Hey, maybe you would be a preacher." That's not something people said to, at least in the Midwest, to girls in the '80s. So I had a very good friend, still have a good friend, who was fifth generation minister in her family, but the first woman. And I saw how much hell she was getting from her family, from her denomination about feeling called to preach. And I was like, this is terrible. Why would I ever put myself through that? And so I, I was like, no, no, no. And I began to have friends who were seminarians. I was still in undergrad. And I could see that like they were normal people, but it looked like a heavy burden to lift. Like people tell you their problems and want you to say something holy back. And how do you know how to say something holy back? And I mean, that's still the case, but it seemed really a hard thing to do.
Daunting.
Very daunting and like, good for you. Like not me. And I was actually on a college fellowship retreat. It was a ski trip. I don't ski. I just like the lodge and the hot chocolate. And so I was at a ski trip. Everyone else is skiing, and I'm there doing my little quiet time with God and reading the Bible. And I got to Amos, and you're not flipping through Amos. Like God takes you to Amos, right? And it was Amos's call story, right? And Amos says to Amaziah, I was not a prophet or a prophet's son, but I was a herdsman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. And God took me as I followed the flock and said, go. And I knew instantly that was me. And I I called my friend, same friend who was a fifth generation minister, and was like, can you believe God told me this? And she just laughed. And I was like, yeah, no. And I heard it clearly. And I was like, I don't know, we're not going to do this. I don't think so. And now, mind you, it wasn't a whole lot of time. Like that was maybe February. And by June, I look up and I'm just around all these seminarians, all these preachers, young preachers. And I kind of was like, well, whenever I don't do things the way God suggests, it tends not to go well. And so maybe I should listen. But I was still very torn about it. And then I instantly, I think I had been at a conference, I'm going to say maybe April. It was the Race Matters conference at Princeton many years ago. And I met Angela Davis she was sitting in a little place next to me at the PJ's Pancake House before it burned down. So all the seats were very, very tight. And somehow I ended up in this conversation with her because she's Angela Davis, right? So of course I struck up a conversation. And I don't know what I said to her, but she's like, you should meet Renita Weems. And I said, I must have said something about religion. And, Renita will say, well, I'm the only religious person she knows. But she said, you should meet Renita Weems. And so I was like, of course, I didn't know who Renita Weems was, but I didn't say that. I said, I'm not familiar with her work right now. And Angela Davis arranged for me to go to the National Black Men's Health Project conference where both she and Renita were keynoting.
I just really want people to hear that you just said Angela Davis introduced you to Renita Weems. I don't know if people got that, but I just wanted to make
it's a crazy story.
Yeah.
And Renita Weems was preaching like a breakfast event. And I'm sitting there and I had this vision. And in the vision, it was like everything in my dorm room had like a Muppet voice, a Muppet mouth. Remember how like Muppets would give the mouth to everything? Uh-huh. And they were all praising God because I wouldn't, which is very much like the triumphant entry story in Luke, where it says, if they don't praise me, the rocks are going to cry out. And it was like, those were my rocks crying out because I wouldn't do it. And I was like, whoa, that's not good. And it was the first time I thought about being a minister and I didn't feel scared. And Renita Weems was talking about, I don't know what. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. Okay, God, it's going to be okay. And so next, of course, I've now read Renita Weems' books. At that time, I asked for intimacy and Just a Sister Away. So I'm bringing them up. I'm standing in line. And Angela Davis is standing there like, oh, this is the young woman I told you about. And I'm just crying. And I'm like, I'm going to be a minister. I'm going to be a minister. She's like, okay, why don't you sit down here and collect yourself for a minute? Which is, was very Renita Weems to say.
Very Renita Weems to say. Those of us who have Renita connected to our call in some way really understood that.
So many, right? And I was reading that wonderful book by William H. Myers, right? God's yes was louder than my no. And so I was reading call stories. Like I was all around my yes. I just wasn't quite there. But it was this vision I had, and because I'm awake, but I saw it very clearly. And I was like, oh, I have to do this. And I told my mom and my aunt, and they were like, oh, praise God. Like they knew, everybody knew but me. And they were like, so now what? Do you wear like long dresses? And I
Yeah.
was like, no, I'm still 19.
Isn't it funny to you how people knew before you? That was my experience too. People knew long before. Well, I don't know if they knew before I knew, or if they knew before I was cognitively ready to say yes. Like somewhere in me, I think I may have known like earlier, but yeah, unlike you, I actually knew a lot of women preachers growing up because I grew up in the holiness tradition.
Oh,
I grew up in the Baptist church and in the holiness church. And there were a lot of women, even pastors, in the Church of God Anderson when I was growing up. But that still didn't say to me, "Oh, you are called to preach." It was. I like telling the story that it was a drunk deacon who said, "God done called you to preach to me," and I said, "Oh, God doesn't call women to preach." He said, "I don't believe God called women to preach either, but God doesn't call you."
you know,
So, yes,
it,
it's
it was. I mean, I think also I knew that AMEs were better to women in ministry, right? I grew up Baptist and AME. My parents were Baptist in earlier parts of, when I was younger. And I didn't really think denominationally. I didn't think like, I just thought Black Christians, right? And so, but I felt like, well, AMEs hate women less than Baptists do, right? I mean, it wasn't like I thought it was equal, but I was like, I think I got a better shot here. And I mean, I had this wonderful AME church I grew up in, a wonderful AME church I went to college with, and I love the history of the AME church. I love the values of the AME church. And so I felt like I chose to be AME. I didn't really feel like I had to be,
right,
um, because I was like, well, God called me,
right,
right?
right. So let me get on that. So Jarena Lee uh, had this experience, and she accepted her call, and Richard Allen said, "Yes, you actually preach the sermon, but we don't ordain women." And then when she comes back later, he licenses her to preach, and and she is the first licensed preacher woman to preach in the AME. There's a story of her planting all these AME societies. For those of you who don't know what a society is, it's the gathering of the way Methodism works. I'm United Methodist now. Is you have classes in homes, and then you get those classes together, and two or three classes become a society, right? So she designed all these classes in Canada, in Ohio. She risked her life to go into the deep South. And almost every society, she planted the first society in Ohio. Every society she planted grew into a huge church
Of course.
because she tried it. She tells the story, and I don't know who verified it, that she traveled 2,325 miles in 1 year, and in that year preached 178 sermons in that 1 year. And she preached in schools, and in fields, and in churches, and in prisons, and in homes. She just found a way for her ministry to be in place even before she was fully ordained. Can you talk about? And so I'm always curious about the fact that you wrote Bipolar Faith before you wrote academic writing. And that feels a lot like Jarena Lee to me. I'm just telling you, it does. Can you say something about that?
Yes, actually, Bipolar Faith came out after other academic pieces.
Oh, okay.
But the preaching part was what scared me, actually. I didn't like public speaking, and I had a list growing up. And so that talking in front of other people part, I was not really a fan of that. And so that's how I knew it was God, because it wasn't me saying, yeah, I really want to get up in front of people and talk. Um, I didn't see that as something that was my gift. I'm like, no, I write. other people talk and I write. And I love about Jarena Lee was that she didn't feel like she needed permission from others, right? She had permission from God. And she was like, have calling, will preach, right? Anywhere, everywhere. And I think I love that because I kind of came into ministry feeling like preaching is part of it, but not the only part of it, right? It was the most public part, the part that people saw the most, but there were all types of ways to be preacher, all types of ways to be a minister. And I felt that way from the beginning. And that's a hard way to feel when the only thing that is valued is preaching and pastoring. And I knew early on that I was not called to pastor. I was like, I'm happy to support people who are called to pastor. I love being an assistant minister, associate minister. Um, but the pastor thing didn't feel like something I was called to do. On one level, what's great about that is everyone left me alone because I didn't want what the goods were. Right? I didn't want the goods. um,
Speaking with anybody.
right. But I did have this attitude, and I didn't say it out loud, but I'm sure it was all over my face, where I felt like these people can go crazy and I'm still good. Because I felt like, well, the bishop didn't call me and say, Monica, would you like to be a minister?
Right,
No, God called me. And
right.
if for whatever reason it didn't work out with this church, God had still called me. And I would still be doing something called ministry wherever I landed. And I had a, yeah, so I think I see that similarity of like, I didn't feel like I wanted it, because I love my denomination, that love hate relationship. Um, but I didn't feel like I needed it.
She she silenced herself for the sake of her marriage for
Mm.
7 years. These are her words in her autobiography. By the way, this is my aside. I love that she published an autobiography like that and is the first Black woman to do it in the US.
Hmm.
An autobiography,
I
1849.
love it.
I love it. I love that. But what I was going to say about that, she said that silencing herself to make her husband happy made her sick of mind and spirit. And so when he died and she moved
Mm.
back to Philly, she determined she was not going to silence herself for anybody else ever again. That's kind of what that made me think of when you were saying I I you didn't call me when I sat for my ordination exam. The chair of the exam said to me, "What are you going to do if these people say no?" And I said, "God has set before me an open door that no one can shut. And if God shuts a door, no one will be open." I said yes to God.
Mhm.
It's the same thing, right? I said yes to
Right,
God. And if this door isn't the one, there's another one that
right,
because the
right.
call is not going to go away.
Exactly. I mean, if only, right? I mean, the call does not go away. It doesn't, and it in some ways the silencing breaks my heart, right? We all know that silence, um it kills you, right? It's you know your silence will not save you. I mean, we've heard
Right.
this from Black feminists over and over again, with Audre Lorde's quote being one of the most well known. um and so, but I get it too, right? um Marriage and is one of the most dangerous places, honestly, for women to be in. And this is like now, forget even then. Um, and what she probably had to do to survive. Um, and right, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
And and so I'm glad, not that he died per se, but that she got to a pivot point where she was like, no, I'm not going to be quiet, because that would have been, it's soul destroying, right?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And she she actually was physically ill after she went back to Philly, and
Right.
she
Right.
traveled with her illness. and the Allens kept her children when she traveled. I love that.
I
I
was
love,
like, who's with the
right.
kids?
I love that. She
Mhm.
traveled. They kept her kids. I love that. He didn't ordain her right away, and he only licensed her, but he helped facilitate her go doing what God told her to do. I mean, my point is, he was at the limits of how bold he felt, right?
Yeah,
But even at his limit, he supported her because
right. I mean,
that
the child
wasn't
care
her
is big.
limit. Say what?
The child care is big.
I know, and that wasn't her limit. So he
Yeah.
felt limited, but he helped her not stop at his limit, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of support matters, right? Um, that that is going to, like I can't support you, but I'm gonna help remove the barrier that holds you back, right?
Right.
I mean, and I think about, a lot of the ministry when I've done is, we think about, well, what are the barriers to people getting here and how can we take those barriers out, right? And that's a ministry right there.
Yes. Which which surprises me about the AME, because you would have thought that watching Jarena Lee and later Elaw and Amanda Berry, any number of these women that were her contemporaries, either just before her or just after her, that men would have been persuaded. This is how I know people aren't persuaded by evidence, right? Because they voted in 1852 in the board of a book of discipline not to ordain women after she had been preaching for those many years. They
Right.
voted in 1852, nope, we're not going to ordain women. And I mean, and it's such a weird thing. So for me, I guess the question is, I'm not quite sure what the question is in my head, except for in the time we're in right now, it feels like this kind of back and forth in history. Like, you made these gains, if you
Right.
can call them gains, but now
Mhm.
you have voted against the very thing that you have testified. I mean, not Richard Allen himself. I'm talking
Yeah.
about the church.
Right.
You
Well,
got anything to say about
I
that?
do. Um, I was, flipping through my Sunday morning online churches one day, and I caught our friend Otis Moss the third saying something. It stuck in my head because he was saying, no one outlaws dogs reading because we all know dogs can't read. They outlawed enslaved African Americans reading because clearly enslaved African Americans were reading, right? So you wouldn't outlaw something that wasn't happening, right? So you knew women were preaching enough to take the time to say they can't preach. And usually when you don't, it's because we don't want to share power, not because you can't preach, right? Like we don't want people reading because when you read, you're going to start learning things, not that you literally can't read, because clearly you can or you wouldn't have to outlaw it. And so that's what it makes me think about, right? That you wouldn't have to outlaw something if you didn't know it was happening and happening in an effective way. Um, but I do also love the part of the story where he hears her preach and he's like, "Oh wow, well okay, right?" And that was in some ways my experience. Like no one, I was the egghead, not the preacher. And so when I came home and preached the first sermon, I'm like, "Oh, look at that," And my parents were like, "This is not the plan." Like my mom, like we had a plan and this was not the plan. And
What was the
so
plan? What was the plan, Monica?
I mean, we were already on. I mean, Plan A was be a math major and go on Wall Street, and
Oh,
then I
okay.
majored in Black people, and they were like, "What?" And so I had just gotten them on Plan B, which was
Black
maybe I'll be
people.
an academic. Yeah, I mean African American studies, but they were like Black people, and my parents are the ones who had fought for Black studies, right, in
I
the
know,
'60s, and
but
but
that
they're like,
still wasn't Wall Street.
right, and now they're like, how much like economic power can you lose? Right now, you're going to be a minister. And my dad was like, oh, okay. Like, but it wasn't until that first sermon, right? And other people in my community. Um, so I get that part, right?
Yeah, I mean, that affirmation of one's call is, I mean, it comes even when people are trying to silence it, I think. I mean, um, that because the word does have an impact. And here, when I say the word, I mean the spoken word. I'm
Right.
not the ability, the power of the spoken word, and the authority with which you say it has an impact on people, right?
It does.
Uh, Even people who claim they are not impacted by your words. Yeah, I'll never forget that I preached at this UCC church, and no, I was at a Baptist church, and this guy said, I came because they said you were going to preach and you teach preaching, and I wanted to see if you could preach. And I'm glad he told me that after the fact, right? Because then
Right.
I'm self conscious. And then, but he said, oh my God, you can preach. I might have to think about women preachers now. I was like, okay, God, what a great setup. Because I think if I'd have known he was sitting there wanting, you know, me
Yeah.
to
It would make you get in your
preach,
head about it. Right.
it would have been in my head. But just walking in the spirit of it allowed me to just flow. Like, you know, I'm not a hooper, so it's not because I tuned up and did any of that. But I do preach with some authority, and I preach with a sense of fierceness about justice, which I think justice is at the core of the gospel, so that comes through, I think, when I am preaching. I think I'm telling you, I reread stuff about Jarena Lee at least once a year, but sometimes all the way through the year. My autobiography, I had to get another one because the first one
Got all torn up.
it was tattered to pieces, and of course, I have her autobiography in other volumes, but I mean her personal, the one hers. But I said all that to say this. To me, that is a part of, as I was trying to get to, the spiritual dimension of this work, right? So when I thought about you, I was thinking, who do I know that taps into the spirit in the way that Jarena Lee did, that seemed to have some roots in our African lives? And that's what, when I read her work,
Hmm.
it's the same thing with Harriet Tubman. I'm like, oh, I see what y'all are doing. This root work you're doing, this, because she was a healer and she was with them when they were working on the yellow fever outbreak in Philly. And the only people that weren't sick were the AME people who were going around the city healing people. You can't convince me that they weren't using indigenous healing practices.
I have kind of this funny Harriet Tubman story that goes with this. The movie Harriet came out during the pandemic, right? Kind of pandemic time. And so my child was maybe 7 at the time. And the school showed it, kind of got a way to show it on Zoom. And it was kind of like, we're going to watch this and we're going to talk about it afterwards. So we watch Harriet. And then we get on the Zoom call. Maybe there are 30 people on this call. And they're talking about it. And my child, right, gets really upset. And because I guess they're talking about, well, what do you think happened here? And my kid was like, I guess they are paying attention, was like, this is racist because they they don't think that God can talk to Harriet Tubman, but God talks to everybody. And I was like,
I love Harlem. I love her.
I know. And I was like, yes, right. But out of the whole movie, not the freedom part. Harlem was like, God is talking to her, and they need to respect that. And so, that's what this God is talking, right? God is talking to us, and this idea that God only talks to some of us, I don't get that. Where did that come from?
Where does that come from? I,
Right?
I don't get that. I love Harlem for saying that
I
because it's
know.
disrespectful. I'm going to hold on to. This is disrespectful. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, so talk about your own sort of contact of God speaking beyond the call, but even your call into a variety, a hybridity of religious practices. That's the way I like to describe it because I think I don't know that I mean it's hybrid. I mean multi
Yeah.
religious,
Um,
plural religious
I
dimensions.
think the vision part matters here because I come from people who dream. At least I was a dreamer as a kid. I still am. I dream a lot, like every night. I remember my dreams, but now I do, not always. But I was a dreamer as a kid. And so
Dream in
when I was
Technicolor.
a little kid, yeah, I was a little kid,
Did
um,
you dream in Technicolor?
just regular. I mean,
Uh,
not just color, regular color, I guess.
yeah,
I
I dreamt as a child in vivid colors.
It would
So
just be like regular life things. And my grandmother would ask me my dreams and play the numbers on them, which is why I didn't know number playing was illegal till I read the autobiography of Malcolm X because everybody did it openly. And so when she would
everybody
ask
did it, right?
she would ask me my dream and play the numbers based on my dream. And so I would dream, I had great aunts with the dream book, right? And if you had a dream you didn't know, you would call that one and she would open the dream book, wherever this book comes from, right? And say it means this. Um, there's a story in my family where I kind of dreamt about my grandmother's death, but no one told me what the dream meant until many years later. And I was very angry. I was like, you should have told me that that's what it meant. And so it was a vision, right? The Muppet vision that got me into this whole AME ministry thing. And it was also another dream. Like kind of I felt called to Ifa, to the practice of traditional Yoruba religion. And so I guess I pay attention to dreams, especially ones that I'm like, wait, this is a little unusual, or this has symbols in it that I recognize as this. And the AME church was not Christianity may be a proselytizing religion, but they weren't out looking for women preachers, right? It's not like the streets of evangelism in black churches, and so and Ifa doesn't go looking for people, right? You're called to it, and so but I didn't know I was called. I just knew I had a dream, and I didn't know I was supposed to tell someone about the dream, um, but I did eventually, and the first thing that this was when I danced with. I wasn't in the community. I was out there being, minister all the time, Christian minister. She said, "Oh, you're not supposed to just study this. You're supposed to live this." And I said, "Okay." I mean, I didn't argue. I just was like, "But I have a plan, and I'm a person like to plan my work and work my plan." And that was not really in the plan, but it wasn't outside of the plan either, right? And so I was very open, but I didn't really know what to do because it wasn't a tradition I was raised in, right? So I didn't know other next steps, right? Um, there was like a baby internet, so you couldn't go Googling. There's no Google, right? You couldn't just go find people online at the time. You had to kind of look for relays around Black people and see who didn't look shady, right? And then start talking to them. Um, but I believe in, I believe it, I guess, right? The visions, the dreams, like this is one way, not the only way, of course, that God speaks to me, and I'm assume many other people. It just seemed like a very normal. I don't know if that works with white people. Do white people dream in the future? I don't know. But I know other black people who do, and so not all, right? But I know that's one of the ways that God speaks to me, and I would tell my babalao. I said, "Oh, divination is like preaching. Like you have this ancient text and you have these people sitting in front of you and you have to make this ancient text make sense to who's sitting in front of you. with a combination of your training and your spirit. So divination is not that different from preaching, right? It's the same idea. Um, Not nearly as charismatic a process in terms of what it looks like when you're doing it. But I said I know this technique, right? I understand how this works. You have this text that makes no sense, and you have to make it make sense, like the disciples say to Jesus, who gets to sit on the right hand of God the Father? And they're like, well, there was this farmer and he had these seeds. You're like, that is not answering my question. But is this not the way of Africans? Right? Like you
Right.
ask a question like, and there was this farmer or Eshu and Oya were walking down the street, and you're like, what does this have to do with my question?
Right.
Um, and yet it does, right? Like you answer a question with a story.
Yeah. Parabolic.
Exactly. And people say this is very unique to Jesus. And I'm like, and
Not
black
really.
people, right?
Yeah, I know that's not true. It's not you, but I think part of why you could encounter Ifa and say, "Oh, I know this," because you were open in your spirit, and but a lot of people have been colonized so desperately so that our spirituality, our indigenous spiritualities, are called demonic, and so we have to, we, how that story.
Yeah,
Son,
and I didn't get that kind of Christianity. That's not
I
the black
didn't.
Christianity I got. My
Mother did
grandmother,
that.
my grandmother was raised by an enslaved African American, and so I'm like, we were like two beats out of slavery. She was a church going woman, with the herbs in the
My
alley,
mother was a root
right?
worker,
Asking
and
me about my dreams and playing numbers and doing,
her mother
all the
was
things.
12 when she came out of slavery.
Right,
So
and
yeah, we're not that far from slavery. That's why every time somebody says get over it, I'm like, whatever.
right, and I didn't get hell and fire and brimstone in my home church. Like I didn't that maybe the generation right below me got that, but I didn't get that at all. It was very much about justice, about helping your community. Um, that was the way I thought a black church. And so it didn't have, even though I had been in evangelical circles, I was like, yeah, everything but that part. Right? Like I was very clear, like we're not doing that part. That it was about helping. Like evangelism to me was like feeding, feeding people who are hungry, not I have to make them believe what I believe. Right? I didn't think about evangelism in those ways, and I think that's what we hear about the Jarena Lee story. Right? I'm going around and we're going to help people who need help.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. One of the things, I don't think people know this about her. One of the things she did when she traveled as a preacher, yes, they did that, but she would also help people plant their gardens and prepare to eat. Right? My mother, when I was growing up, would say, if I have a slice of bread, you have some too, because I
yeah.
will divide it, we will all eat. My mother, I grew, my sister and I talk all the time. We're like, are we misremembering our childhood? Because nothing about what our parents said was oppressive. It was all about helping the community and
Right.
being activists and whatever, and which, by the way, is at the core of AME, which is why I understand why that would mean so much to you, especially in your fluid spirituality and religiosity.
I don't know if current day AMEs feel that way,
I know,
but
I know,
you
but I
know,
mean historically,
there's always that tension though. The AME church has always had this tension, like, you know, the Henry McNeil Turner and the Daniel Payne. Like, stop running in the circle, let's all go to Africa. Right. I mean, there's always been like regular black people, right? I mean, like the wider black community, this sense of like this is our roots and this is what we do. And we need to also be respectable and climb these social ladders, right? These educational ladders, these social ladders. And I guess I just hold the two of those together instead of seeing them as a tension, right? Like education and Africa, right? That they're not, they don't have to be opposed in that sense.
yeah, yeah, exactly, and I'm saying that our patron saint Jarena Lee helps me with that on a regular basis. We are halfway through this conversation, and so I'm going to make a turn so that people can come with we can do the a commercial break and then the Q&A. And as we're going into the commercial break, I ask you if you would be willing to share why you said on your post for this event that you support Woman Preach.
I think this is just the best thing. And even though I've never been at a women preach event, right, as a participating in it, I have sponsored some people. I remember early on, people would ask for sponsorship to go to women preach events. And, it was hard as a young woman preacher figuring out how to preach, right? Not that they weren't preaching classes, but I didn't have a whole lot of role models. I remember having like the cassette with people's tape ministry, right? And I had these cassette tapes that you would get from, I guess you just order them in the mail, right? Brenda Salter McNeil, right? And I mean, there were these 5, 6 women whose tapes you could get and listen to, and they were kind of role models, I guess. But I felt like I'm not that dynamic, right? I don't hoop. I can't sing. I don't tune. I don't close like I'm supposed to close, right? When my friend and I were preaching, I would write her intros and she would write my closings because I was better at intros, and she would tell me to close it like this. And that wasn't, it was hard to find my voice. And it took me a long time to realize that God didn't call me to preach like anyone else, that
That
God
part.
called me to be me. Um, but I didn't have a whole lot of diversity of role models of people preaching in varieties of styles. And there weren't any in my home conference. I'm from Michigan, right? These are East Coast people over here, right? I lived in the East Coast at that time, but when I went into ministry, I was 19 and the median age in my conference was 65,
Yeah,
right? Michigan had no seminaries at that time. And so I felt very like I had to prove myself, but I was very lost in a lot of ways. And I just think it's so amazing that other women preachers don't have to go through that, right? That they can be around other women preachers, that they can find the voice that's their voice because that's who God called and who God wants. It's like you, not you trying to be someone else. Um, and so I'm here for that. I wholeheartedly um, love, and everyone comes back saying this was the best experience of my life. Like everyone
I
comes
love it
back
when
to
I
me
hear that from
in
people.
full, right? No one comes back like, oh, that was a waste of my time and money. Like, no, I've never heard that.
I
And,
haven't either, and it makes me happy. We say we're trying to help you find what God sounds like in your own throat, and
yeah,
that's what you have just described.
yeah.
And I want to appreciate that you have sponsored people to come and help supported people to come to Woman Preach events, and particularly to help some people come to the Jarena Lee Preaching Academy. And on that note, you and I are going to go off camera, and I'm going to invite the dean of the Jarena Lee Preaching Academy to come in and say more about that. Don't nobody leave because we're going to do Q&A after this.
Coming right back.
Right, right. Oh, thank you all so much just for being here, period. It is my privilege to serve as the dean of the Jarena Lee Preaching Academy yet again. I every time I'm asked, my yes is at the ready. And so we just want to give you an opportunity tonight to know that your giving tonight directly supports Jarena Lee Preaching Academy. I'm so glad that Dr. Monica said that it was hard finding her own voice at 19. I just want to tell you, for some of us, it's hard finding our voice at 19, times 2, 3, and 4. And so finding your voice at any age. I see y'all in the comments. That's right. Represent your JLPA year. If you are a JLPA alum, you put your year in the chat so we can see you. This is a week-long gift of community, learning, growing, laughing. I mean, cackling, laughing. And there's also some crying, and there's always a move of the spirit, and it never moves in the same way. And when Spirit comes and moves with her thickness, we respond. And so we plan, we schedule, we stay on schedule, and then Spirit just pops in and says, yeah, no, I'm gonna let y'all go to your next session, but right now I need to have this moment. And we have experiences. People who've never preached before get to preach their first sermon, and they get to hear a chorus of women's voices saying, preach, woman, preach. They get to hear constructive criticism, constructive comments that they can take with them. They take with them all of the members of their cohort who will continue to encourage them as they preach long after they have left their week with us. But sometimes you have an event and we couldn't plan it, we can only capture it. Your gift will help us provide opportunities to hear comments like, I didn't know that I could do that. I didn't know that women could preach like that. I finally know what God sounds like in my throat. And the one that I'm going to have trouble saying without getting choked up. I didn't know that God could love me even though I'm queer. What you say, this is a place where you get to hear not only what God sounds like in your throat, but you get to hear God calling you beloved. And so for that gift, we can't put a dollar amount on that, but I would encourage you, if you know someone who would appreciate a week like this, please refer them to our website. If you are able to give tonight, that will help the 20 some women who are coming to be with us in just a few months. They are on their journey to Jarena Lee, and we are excited to welcome them. And so your support means everything in ways that we hope we can capture and share with you. And in some ways, we may not see until the ripples come all the way out back to you. I hope that you will be moved to become a giver, whether a one time giver or a recurring giver. We like the recurring gifts. The size does not matter. It is your gift that helps us do what we do. And so we thank you for the gift that you are able to give, whether on tonight or at some future time. Your gifts help us do this good work of hearing what God sounds like in our throat. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Thus endeth, let's see. Oh, Yvette, we're going to tell you how you can learn about Women Preach, and we are going to get you, because you are too close to MTSO. So we are going to make sure you are in the spot. And I'm going to hop off so you all can go with your Q&A.
Thank you, Carla, for all the work you do to prepare people to come for that intensive week, and also for that call to give. It encouraged me. I'm going to give a donation specifically for Jarena Lee to support the people who are coming this summer. So thank you. Okay, Monica, do you have any questions for me before we start taking questions from everybody else? Y'all, this is where you start putting your questions in the chat. What are your questions for Dr. Monica, or from me, or about Jarena Lee?
Do I have questions? I mean,
Or comments?
I really appreciate the lifting up of Jarena Lee. And, I don't think of myself as a preacher's preacher. Like, I have friends who are preachers, right? Like the people who preach to preachers. They're the ones who are always at your academy helping people. The people I would say I would cross town to see preach. And, you know, I, I guess part of it, I want to say, like, we don't all have to be preachers. Um, it's just, you never know, right? There are snippets of sermons I still remember, like from early 90s, just something that sticks in your head. And so it's like, you never know what you're going to say from the pulpit that is going to just stay with somebody, right? For years and years. Like, and yeah, you never know.
So I'm not a preacher's preacher, but I'm gonna tell you this story based on what you just said. I preached a sermon back in 1988. This is how long it's been. I have been in, it was at a women's conference. There were a lot of women there. I have been in airports as late as 2023. And somebody came up to me and said, you preached this sermon, and told me the title. Yeah, the same. And said, and here's what you said. I'm like, that was 1988. You know what I mean? and
You
you're
never know.
that's not quite 40 years, but it's pushing toward 40 years. It's like, yes, and there are people like that in my life.
Right.
There are phrases that has stuck with me, that have actually shepherded my life, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. um, I agree that if you're trying to be like somebody else, you might miss being who you are.
Yeah.
So, Takia wants to know, for you to talk about your academic training as a philosophical theologian and how that uh, impacts your preaching work and your pluralism.
Well, many people know I'm a process theologian, and I've always gotten this
Some may not know
question.
what that is, so
Oh,
say.
well, I'll let y'all know. Um, I'm a process theologian, which means I think about change as being the core of everything that happens, and that we are always in
Very
process. We're
bluntly,
always
God has changed.
changing, yes. And that's true of us in the world and true of God. And I think, this used to come up a lot. I don't think it comes up so much anymore in Black religious scholarship circles. Like, well, how do you preach that? And I always think, well, how would I not preach that? Because if this is what I believe, you preach what you believe. You preach what what makes sense to you. And so I've always done that. And I don't say, I don't believe X, I believe Y, because who wants to hear that? I just talk about why. And it just sounds very different usually than what other people have heard because it's not classical theology, right? It's a different theological perspective, a different way of thinking about things. Um, did I get this? I think I got this from Anita Weems, but I can't remember. Because she was one of my professors at Vanderbilt, because I met her. That's how Vanderbilt got on my radar. But I used to always, when I was preaching a lot in narrative preaching, I would say, who doesn't have voice? Like, who have we not heard from? And then try to step into them in their shoes, right? I think that's very much how Anita White writes. That's how I think of her writing. And so that was one thing I used to try and do a lot. Like, who's missing? Who doesn't have power? Who doesn't have voice? And my calling is to, you know, take away that silence, right? Is to give that voice, a perspective that you might not hear from my colleagues, right? Um, so I guess that kind of answered the preparation question, but that I'm always, talking about what makes sense to me, and that is, um, I guess the gospel, right? We're supposed to preach the gospel, and I think for many it's this kind of evangelical, go out and tell all the people. But for me, the gospel is that the end is not the end, right? And that's core to process, right? Where we start in the middle of the story and everything is there's always more. There's always more change, more hope, more newness that can come. And so for me, the gospel is the end. Just when you think the end is the end, it's not the end, right? Like
Yeah,
that's the resurrection. That's the good news. And so I'm always trying to say that, right? In whatever mode I'm saying that in. And I find that to be as true in the Black Christianity that I love and in Ifa as well, right? That there's more, right? I mean, we honor ancestors, which is a very clear way of saying the end is not the end. Even when you're not in this body, you're still with us, right?
yeah. The dead do dance. That's one of my favorite things. You were telling us somebody asked the question, if you could say more about what you meant about divination being like preaching.
Oh, well, sure. If you get yourself to a diviner, right? Um to a Ianifa, to a Babalao. Well, let's go back, right? Divination, there's divination in the Bible. We act like divination is kind of like this
Thank
African
you.
thing,
I was waiting on you to say
right?
that.
Like they're throwing bones. I mean, that whole David Nathan thing where he calls him out because he divined what had happened.
Mhm.
Um, the Hebrew people were kind of like, we get it all. We like And so there's casting of lots. I mean, tarot cards, right? It's all reading tea leaves. Those are all divination. In Ifa, divination takes you to a scripture. It takes you to a story. It takes you to one of the Odu, our scriptures. And and there are certain ways you can read that the divination will tell you about reading that scripture. But you still have to make it make sense to the person sitting in front of you, right? It's always contextual, just like preaching is, right? That's why, in some ways, the whole tape ministry is kind of weird, or that you're preaching online to people you don't know, because the prayer used to be like, well, what do these people need, right? What are the people I'm going to talk to tomorrow, right? What might be the word they need? And so
And
it's
that's still my prayer. It's just
mhm,
that I think this is my cosmology at work. I think that the powers and principalities take what these particular people need sometimes and translate it when it goes out into the atmosphere. And
right,
then people who were not in that room hear something
right,
entirely different from the
right,
people that you preach that to.
right.
Yeah.
And that's tough. That's right. Because divination is still kind of like you and me right in front of each other for the most part. Even if it's online, it's not like a crowd of people,
Right.
right? It's us two, and spirit, and maybe two or three people you brought with you. Um, and so, but it's the same technology, right? We have this ancient scripture, these ancient stories, and we want to make them make sense to what's happening now.
Right. So there was another question that caught my attention, and somehow I have lost it. So if somebody is reading, uh, who have we? Any advice for those who may not be called to the pulpit regularly and want to pursue ministry in the church and to public spaces or arts? Any advice?
That's me, right? I was like, if I had to preach every week, I'm not the one. That's a lot of work. Like, like I was like, visit sick people, balance a budget. Like, God bless y'all. And most of my pastor friends are like, and if I had to go teach those people every week, it would be the end of me, right? I mean, everyone's got it in the right place. But I think it's that sense that, there's ministry in so many places. I mean, other academics can tell you advising is showing off pastoral care.
It is.
Um, it's a
It
little
is.
bit about what class to take and a whole lot about your life. And so, um, all it's everywhere you go, you bring who you are, you bring your vocation, you bring your calling, and you hope, at least I do, you hope and pray that you can make that difference. Because there are people who won't be in a church, right? There are people who won't come on Sunday morning or log on Sunday morning. Um, and you're the witness, right? You're the scripture, your life, your actions, whatever you're doing. So I guess the advice is just do you, right? Do the thing that you feel called to do. This is gonna sound real churchy, and trust God for the increase. But trust
my
God for the increase.
my pastor in San Antonio, it was a small number in the congregation, but it was a big
Mhm,
church. Like I
mhm.
think there were like 60 people who were members of that congregation on any regular basis.
Right.
Pastor Ike died, and the
Mm,
church filled to capacity because, unbeknownst to us, he was going to all these barbershops and corners and playing dominoes with people and buying people lunch and whatever. And I mean, these street people filled that church
mhm.
up. He was pastoring a people more than he was pastoring. I mean, he was pastoring us, he was,
Yeah.
but where his ministry took him was wherever his ministry took him, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Tunji has this question: how do you remain true to who you are and what you believe in contradictory spaces of power, especially within the Black church power dynamics? There's
Um,
always this pressure to align with groupthink or going along to get along. I know this is not actually a good question for neither you nor me because we're both like, I don't
right. I'm not sure I'm the right one.
like, what
um,
pressure?
right, to ask. Because I'm the person who will walk out down the middle aisle and be like, I know you didn't just say that, and just leave. So which would rile my mom to no end, like, oh my God, baby, can you just, and I would be like, no, that's not who you
I
raised
can't.
me, right? So I guess I'm not good with group think. Like I said, I had a hard time getting ordained, um, because I just didn't see it that way. But I also didn't want what they had. So I
Right.
had to say that, right? It's easy to walk away from structures of power when you don't want what the power structures value, right? Um, there's power in everything, right? If it's not the church, it's the academy. If not the academy, it's the law, right? Whatever field you're in, there are politics, there are structures of power. Um, so I guess how would I answer
Because
that
there are
question?
people. Let's just be real clear.
Right,
Because there are people, there's power in
right,
politics. Remember?
right. And I would say, I guess if I were to maybe translate this to the academy, right, where I've led more of my career, where I have wanted, right, what the people valued, the power structures valued, I think I just enjoy what I do. And so the things that that one would do to get tenure, to get promotions, I like doing, right? I like reading, I like teaching, I like researching, right? It didn't feel hard or like pressure to me. I didn't feel like I was working for it. I was like, well, I'm gonna do the things and hopefully they'll honor that, right? Um, so maybe that translates in that sense.
Yeah. That
It's
what's funny to me about what you just said is people's like, do you like being a dean? I'm like, I don't know if like is the right word. I'm suited to it. Like it I,
Mhm.
I don't stress over doing it.
Yeah.
I know people who are like, oh my God, I hate this job. I'm like, there are times I want to cuss people out,
I mean, we
but
all do, right?
but
You don't like your job every minute of the
what
day.
job is there where that isn't true? But I'm not stressed over the job itself, over the
Mhm.
calling itself, which is what I hear you saying, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And I mean, the honest thing is, I never tied my income to that, right? Um, so because my livelihood wasn't it's never been tied to the church, I never felt a pressure there. Um, but my livelihood has been tied to the academy, and I don't feel pressured there, right? I'm sure I've lost opportunities I don't know about losing. I'm sure I've had, I could have made more money doing something else, right? Um, but I haven't felt it in that way, and that could just be my personal disposition, right?
Yeah. There's another question about sharing so much of your story. How do you encourage yourself to share your story? And I assume that means and to take
Mhm.
care of yourself, self care.
Um, it's part of my calling, right? And so because it's part of my calling, it's not hard. Especially I've been doing it long enough. It was harder in the beginning, I will say that. And me and God would have conversations about this, right? I would rather not. I was thinking, no. I mean, there were things God's called me to that I was like, we were on a 3-year delay because God would say, you should do this. And I was thinking, that's not a good idea. And then God would say the next year, Monica, you should do this. And I was like, do you know what you're asking? Do you know the fallout of this? And God's like, yes. And then I didn't ask the right question, right? Then and this was particularly when I was called to speak out about mental health, right? That was not something I wanted to talk about. And then it kind of came back, and I said, why do I have to do this? And I really heard God say clearly, because you can. And I understood that because I can,
Yes,
right? And I
right.
don't think it's everyone's calling, but I felt and feel very much called to break silences, to talk about things that other people aren't talking about. Um, and so, I have, I guess, the energy to do it, the joy in doing it. Um, I mean, I don't think my self care is any different than it would be otherwise. Try to sleep, exercise, ice cream, chocolate, friends, right? In that sense. But I wouldn't do it if it weren't a calling. I would happily keep my business to myself. Because all the fallout I thought was there was there. Don't get it twisted. Everything that I thought would be coming came, whether it was speaking about being a survivor of sexual violence, talking about living with a mental health challenge, all the things that I was afraid of happened, but it was okay.
It's
It was
so
okay.
interesting that you say that way, because I just finished writing a piece for Working Preacher where I talk about the fact that following the following God does not mean it becomes easy. I mean, I think people think your yes, like it's a bait and switch if it's not easy. I'm like, no, no. Saying yes doesn't mean easy. Anyway, another
I
question.
strongly believe that God is not coercive. Like God's not, I'm not gonna make you. I'm
Right,
gonna just ask you
exactly.
again. I'm gonna just the call is still there. I'm gonna still keep knock knock knock. And when you ready, you ready. You
But my
know.
point is, when you do say yes, saying yes to that does not mean that God then rolls out a red carpet. It does. It's what you
If
just said.
only.
Right. It's what you just said. It comes with all the challenges that you discerned it would come with. And God
Yeah.
is like, yeah, and
But
go.
I really feel like God's like, I'm giving you what you need to do what I called you to do.
I
And I
believe
think
that.
I felt that early on, right? Like I'm going to give you what you need to do it.
I
Like
absolutely believe
the
that.
amount of love you need, the amount of courage you need, the amount of community and care you'll need.
Community support. Going back
Yeah.
to Jarena Lee, if how could she do all that traveling if Richard Allen and his wife had not kept her babies?
I mean, and I get that. I mean, I had people keeping my baby. I was bringing baby with me. Most people have met my child because of that.
The whole 9 yards. So yes,
Hmm.
um, but yes, that the fact that you are saying, and I am agreeing, is that God gifts us not only with the ability of our yes, but with what we need for our yes,
Yeah,
for the journey ahead.
yeah.
Karen wants to know, where do you find preaching opportunities when newer to the field? Um,
That's a you question.
I knew you were going to say that. I will say what I've heard Gina Marie Stewart say time and time again. If you are praying, God knows your address. I said to God, I really need to. 2 years ago, I said, God, I'm not preaching as much as I want to preach, and then suddenly I couldn't. I had to start turning people down because I had too many preaching engagements with everything else I had to do. I was like, it's actually at the point of prayer. It's like, God, where do you want me to preach? And also to be prepared. So oftentimes people say, I want to preach more, but they're not praying and they're not writing sermons.
Mhm.
They're not reading. They're not taking in the word. I'm not saying this is you, Karen. This is an in general statement, so don't take that personally. So I'm saying read, write sermons, pray, talk to God. I'm with Harlem. Don't That's disrespectful. God talks to everybody. Talk to God. And God will open the door, the necessary doors, or show you where. It may not be the pulpit that you think it is,
No, it
right?
never is.
If, yeah, well, I wasn't gonna say that. It rarely is, uh, and but God will. I believe God makes a way. The I grew up in a church in the country. They used to sing, "The Lord will make a way somehow." If before His throne you bow. You remember that song?
Oh yeah, the Lord will make a way. So
Somehow,
yeah.
right? I said to my soul, "Don't worry, because the Lord will make a way somehow."
you know,
Lynette here, what were you going to say about that? I was
Oh,
going to.
I once worked with a minister as a student minister with a a pastor who said that he came up under a pastor who would sometimes be drunk and you would have to come in and step in and preach at any moment. And
Mhm.
he believed you should always have a sermon in your Bible.
Oh
Right? He
God,
was like, you should always have, of course, you always got a backup sermon. Because you never know. if you're gonna have to step in. And then he would kind of just pick one of us randomly, which I hated. But to be like, okay, you're preaching today, right?
My pastor did that. We went on a trip to Rochelle, New York. No, Rochester, New York.
Mhm.
And it was a bunch of us. And he told us everybody needs to be prepared to preach. I don't know who's going to preach. Everybody needs to be prepared to preach. We're in this Church of God in Rochester, New York. And he
Cold.
stands up and says, there was a man who was sent from God. That thing where John says that the book of John that says that John was a friend of God.
Yeah.
And he's like, he was not God, but he was a friend of God. The
Mhm.
woman that's about to preach. And he said, after the choir has sung, the next voice you will hear will be that of Reverend Valerie Bridgman. I dropped my head, rumbling through my Bible for my sermon in my Bible. Because I found out right before the song was sung that I
Right.
was preaching.
Then you got to write another one so that you have another sermon in your Bible, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's that be ready.
Mhm.
They say be ready, you don't have to get ready. And then as you are readying yourself, God is also opening doors, I think.
Yeah.
Is there any other questions that I've missed? Oh, Jamie preached at a nursing home every week when you first started. Being open to the pulpit may be somewhere entirely different. Yes, Cedric. One in your heart, one in your Bible, one in your back pocket. That's my dad. So you gotta have Bible. You gotta have the sermon with you. Everything else. And Kim Kim McNair said you ought to be able to preach Psalm 23 no matter what.
Just pick one verse, one verse.
One voice. Yes. Oh my Lord.
I think I saw a question about preparation. Did we answer that?
You started to,
I think
but
I
go
started
say
to.
more about how you prepare.
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I think in terms of the overall preparation, right? I went to this school, right? I mean, that's the short version, right? And like many young preachers, I thought it would teach me how to be a minister. I laugh now, um, because it gave me information to that I could then use in ministry, right? Um, but that was a big part of it, right? I mean, some of that was the community you get from it, right? The friends you make. Many of them I'm still friends with. Teaching in divinity school, I'm like, you better make a friend now because you need somebody, you need to know someone in life who's not competing with you, but understands your life and your calling. And when you leave here, you might not find that again. So those friendships matter a lot. Of course, I took the required curriculum, the preaching course, whatever. Um, for me, it opened up a big world to me, which is why I love teaching in divinity school. Like religion doesn't really get enough good press. It didn't then, it doesn't now. I kind of thought it was all preaching Bible church history. I was like, there's theology and ethics and worship and preaching and this. And, like, there's so much going on, right, in religion and what it takes to be a minister, that being exposed to all of that, and then whatever people call contextual ed, field ed, the practicums, being thrown into some situation you're not ready for, right? With some supervision and help and time to reflect on it. To me, that's the preparation. I'm not trying to be an ad for div school, but that's how I prepared, and I found really worthy. Um, and I didn't come in. I had, some ideas clearly about religion, but I wasn't wedded to them tightly. So I was really excited to learn new things and open to learning new things. So, you know, seeing education as a transformative process, not a credential. Because I'm like, if I was credentialing, I was going to pick a different credential. Right? This wasn't the exciting credential to me. So I would say that's a big part of preparation. I think whatever your spiritual practice is regularly is part of your preparation, right? Whatever you're thinking about, what you're taking in, what you're reflecting on, your daily thing, your daily prayers, your daily, assuming it's daily, maybe it's weekly, life be lifing. But whatever it is you do, right, that keeps you connected to God, that's all part of the preparation, even if it's not like I'm sitting here with the Bible open trying to find the title to my sermon. Um, so I think to me, I would say all of that, right, is the preparation, the way you're living, what what's coming into your spirit, what you're taking in, what you're thinking about, how you try to connect with God. Um, I mean, we all have those silences, right? What Renita calls like that winter, right? Where you don't hear God say jack. like, like we're talking about the visions and the dreams, but there are seasons when you hear nada. You are praying, asking, talking. Maybe you're mad at God. Maybe you and God had a falling out. It happens. And you got nothing. And you still have to preach. You may still have to show up. Then I say preach it like it's a fact. Preach what you know to be true, even if you don't feel it. That you don't have to feel it. It's great when you feel it, but you don't have to feel it. You
Right.
don't have to feel it to know the end is not the end, or whatever the gospel is to you. Right? You stand on the part you do know, even if you can't feel it, even if you didn't hear it. Right? And let God give the increase.
You sound so churchy.
I know it's so. I'm like,
Like you're so churchy.
I know I
Uh,
memorized the Bible in the King James version.
I did too, but the, some of my prep is obviously the spiritual disciplines of prayer and sitting in meditation.
Mhm.
I read if I don't feel like translating, which I often don't. I still read a text in as many different translations as possible because I want to see where the cracks are. Because translation is interpretation. I do use working preacher sometimes when I'm because I write for them. I know the scholars who are writing for them. I use Will Gaffney's work um, as resource, but really I use a lot of poetry, read a lot of poetry, listen to a lot of poetry, read a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of biographies. All of that is sermon prep. I know that don't sound like sermon prep, but all of that is sermon prep for me. So that when I'm sitting in front of something, something else can come up in me because it's in me. But as my
Yeah.
mother would say, it can't come out of you if it ain't never in you. So,
Yeah.
um, so yes. Well, we are almost at the end of our time. Dr. Monica, we're going to ask you to stay with us after we let everybody go. But before we go, we want a, I don't want to call it a last word because you're a process theologian. We want a journeying word from you.
Oh man. I'm like, oh, there's many things in my head to say, and I should have known this was coming, right? What would be my journeying word? Maybe it's the part where God talks to us, right? Um, in so many ways, right? In visions, in dreams, in that quiet confidence, in the thing that you can't shake, right? Um, and to me, the Jarena Lee lesson was, I guess that's the one that I really got, right? Is that God calls you, right? All these people around you can up and lose their minds, and they will at times, right? But they didn't pick up the phone and or text you and say, I would really like you to be a preacher. But God called you, and God is everywhere, right? So your calling is where you are, right? And it is I'm not one of those like spiritual but not religious people. I am down with religion because I think there is so much value to structure and history and tradition, and community, right? And so it is wonderful when you can have some kind of religious or faith community, but and it's great when it's a church if that's where you feel called, but it's not the only place, right? Where you may be called to go or what you may be called to do. And so, you know, God called you to be you. It took me a long time to get there. You know, I started at 19, but I didn't get there at 19. I got there like 20 something, like way later. Did I kind of figure out that God wanted me to be Monica, the way Monica is, right? And not to try to preach like other people preach, right? Or sound like they sound, or close like they close. I'm still not good at closing. I just be like, thank you. Um, amen. Like, I'm done now. You know, God called you to be you, or God would have called somebody else, right? God didn't call you to imitate anyone else. And so, all the ways that the more comfort you, the more secure you feel about yourself, and how cool you are, and how interesting you are, and how unique you are, and how God is in you, then the easier all the other stuff gets. And Jarena Lee was like that times 10. Like, she was that on crack. She was like, I know that God called me. And everywhere I go, I'm going to say what God has called me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think my last word about that is thank you so much for being with us on this part of this conversation. As I said when we started, I love honoring our patron saint, Jarena Lee, who was born February 11th, 1783, and who still speaks long beyond the veil. She still speaks to us. And I am thankful for her as a igungun in our lives and leading us and helping us to own the fact that the divine speaks still through and in us. And you really helped us capture that again tonight. So thank you. And thank you to all of you who have joined us either on Facebook or on StreamYard. And those of you who will see this later, because I posted it on my Facebook as well. You can go over to Facebook and post it on your Facebook. So as many people as we see uh, doing it, that would be great. Yes, she is Orisha to us. So that more people can hear this conversation. Thank y'all and good night, everybody.
Thank you.